to our amazing Cheating Tales Lab family. Welcome and thank you for joining us. Your support means the world. Quick question. Where are you listening from today? Which city? Which country? Drop it below. Now, let's dive into today's story. The autumn sun cast long shadows through the bay windows of Howard Graves' home office as he reviewed the quarterly reports from his investment firm. The markets had been volatile, but his company had outperformed expectations yet again. His fingers drummed absently against the mahogany desk, a wedding gift from his wife Stacy 13 years ago. The doorbell's chime broke his concentration. Howard glanced at his watch. 6:45 p.m. He wasn't expecting anyone, and Stacy was upstairs getting ready for their weekly date night. The kids were at their after-school activities, the twins at baseball practice and Sarah at her piano lesson. Rising from his desk, Howard straightened his charcoal suit jacket. At 45, he maintained the same disciplined physique that had earned him a wrestling scholarship to Yale. The morning runs and evening workouts weren't just about health, they were about control, about maintaining the edge that had helped him build his firm from nothing. The doorbell rang again, more insistent this time. "Coming," Howard called out, his deep voice echoing through the foyer. Through the frosted glass panels flanking the front door, he could make out multiple silhouettes. Opening the door, he found himself face to face with his younger brother Eric, flanked by two men in expensive suits that screamed, "Corporate lawyer." "Eric?" Howard's initial smile faded as he noticed his brother's expression, cold, calculated, with a hint of something that looked disturbingly like triumph. "What's this about?" Eric, 3 years Howard's junior, had always been the more conventionally handsome of the two. Where Howard was solid and strong, Eric was lean and sharp, with the kind of looks that open doors in the finance world. But right now, those good looks were twisted into something ugly. "Hello, brother." Eric's voice carried a note of malice that Howard had never heard before. "May we come in? We have some family matters to discuss." Howard stepped aside, his instinct screaming that something was very wrong. The lawyers moved with practiced efficiency, their Italian leather shoes clicking against the hardwood floors as they entered his home. "Your wife," Eric announced, turning to face Howard with a smirk, "promised me a wild night 13 years ago." He paused, savoring the moment like a predator toying with its prey. "And she delivered. Multiple times over the years, actually." The words hung in the air like poison gas. Howard's mind refused to process them for a moment, but Eric wasn't finished. "You see, big brother, while you were building your perfect little life, playing house with my leftovers, I was fucking your wife. And not just once or twice, we've been at it for years. Since before you even married her." One of the lawyers stepped forward, extending a thick manila envelope. "Mr. Graves, these documents require your immediate attention." Howard took the envelope, his movements mechanical. Inside, he found a DNA report. His eyes scanned the document, each word a hammer blow to his world. Probability of paternity, combined paternity index, prior probability. The conclusions were highlighted in yellow. For Jason Graves, age 13, alleged father Eric Graves, probability of paternity, 99.99%. For James Graves, age 13, alleged father Eric Graves, probability of paternity, 99.99%. For Sarah Graves, age 10, alleged father Eric Graves, probability of paternity, 99.99%. "No," Howard whispered, then louder, "No. This is impossible." "Oh, it's very possible," a familiar voice called from the top of the stairs. Howard turned to see Stacy standing there in her silk robe, her blonde hair falling perfectly around her shoulders. She'd always known how to make an entrance. "He's right, Howard," she continued, descending the stairs with deliberate steps. Her voice carried no trace of remorse, only a cold satisfaction. "I've been lying for years. The kids, the marriage, all of it one big, beautiful lie." She reached the bottom of the stairs and walked over to Eric, sliding her arm through his with practiced familiarity. "I only married you for your money, Howard. Eric's always been better. In every way that matters." She smiled, a predatory thing that transformed her beautiful face into something cruel. Bigger bank account, bigger ambitions, and well, bigger in other ways too. Howard's hands clenched into fists, his knuckles white. "Get out," he growled, his voice low and dangerous. "Both of you, get out of my house." The second lawyer cleared his throat. "About that, Mr. Graves." He produced another envelope. "This is an eviction notice. The house, being in both your and Mrs. Graves' names due to marriage laws, is being contested. Additionally, my clients have filed motions to freeze your assets pending investigation of alleged financial misconduct." Howard's mind raced. The house he remembered now. 3 years ago, Stacy had convinced him to put it in both their names. "For tax purposes," she'd said, "and because it shows how much you trust me." "You can't do this," Howard said, his voice steady despite the rage building inside him. "We already have," Eric gloated. "You see, brother, while you were playing family man, Stacy and I were planning. Every trust fund you set up for the kids, every document where you claimed paternity, every financial decision you made thinking you were protecting your family, we documented all of it." Stacy moved to the living room, picking up a framed family photo from the mantel. "You should see your face right now, Howard. Did you really think someone like me would be satisfied with someone like you? Eric and I have been laughing about it for years, how you never questioned why the kids look so much like him, how you never noticed our business lunches, how blind you were to everything. Get out of our house, loser," she smirked, dropping the photo. The frame shattered on the hardwood floor, spiderweb cracks spreading across the glass like the fractures in Howard's world. "Mr. Graves," the first lawyer spoke again, "we'll need your preliminary response to these filings within 48 hours. Mrs. Graves will be seeking full custody of the children, substantial alimony, and compensation for 13 years of fraudulent paternity claims." Howard stood perfectly still, his mind already shifting from shock to calculation. Years of business negotiations had taught him to think clearly even in crisis. "You've made one crucial mistake," he said quietly. Eric laughed. "Oh, and what's that, big brother? You thought you could break me." Howard's voice was ice cold. "You thought 13 years of lies would shatter me. But you forgot something important about me, little brother. I don't break. I don't bend. And I never, ever lose." "Big words from a man who's about to lose everything," Stacy sneered. "The kids aren't yours, the house isn't yours, and soon, half your company won't be yours either." Howard's phone buzzed a text from the Twins' baseball coach. "Practice ending early due to rain. They'd be home in 20 minutes. "The children will be home soon," Howard announced, his tone businesslike. "I suggest you all leave before they arrive. We wouldn't want them to see their mother and biological father for what they really are." "Not yet, anyway. Are you threatening us?" Eric stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. "Threatening you?" Howard's laugh was devoid of humor. "No, Eric. A threat implies uncertainty. I'm making you a promise. You want to play games? Fine. But remember, you chose this battlefield, not me. And unlike you, I don't need to hide behind lawyers and lies to win. We have DNA proof," Stacy spat. "We have documentation. We have everything we need to destroy you." "What you have," Howard replied calmly, "is an impressive collection of evidence proving you've committed multiple felonies. But please, continue explaining your master plan. I'm sure the prosecutors will find it fascinating." For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed Eric's face, but he covered it quickly with another sneer. "Come on, Stacy. Let's leave Howard to pack his things. He'll be needing a much smaller place soon." As they moved toward the door, Howard called out, "Eric?" His brother turned. "Remember when we were kids, and you stole my baseball card collection? Remember what happened after that?" Eric's face paled slightly. As children, Howard had spent 6 months systematically dismantling everything Eric cared about: his friendships, his reputation at school, his prized possessions, until Eric finally returned the cards, completely broken. "You're not kids anymore," Stacy said, but her voice wavered slightly. "No," Howard agreed. "We're not. And this time, you've taken something far more precious than baseball cards." He smiled, and both Eric and Stacy took an involuntary step back. "I'll be keeping the house, by the way. You might want to have your lawyers review the actual property documents. The ones in the safe, not the copies you've been working with." "What do you mean?" Eric demanded. "Leave," Howard said simply, "before the children get home." We can discuss the rest through proper channels. He turned to the lawyers. Gentlemen, I'll have my legal team contact you tomorrow. I suggest you review your client's evidence very carefully before proceeding. Knowingly submitting fraudulent documents to the court is a serious offense. After they left, Howard stood in the foyer, looking at the shattered family photo on the floor. He pulled out his phone and made 3 calls, one to his lawyer, one to his sister Kelly, and one to a private investigator he'd worked with before. The sound of rain outside grew stronger, and Howard could hear the twins' carpool pulling into the driveway. He took a deep breath, straightened his tie, and prepared to protect his children from the storm that was coming. They were his kids, regardless of DNA, and he would make sure they survived this with as little trauma as possible. As he opened the door to greet Jason and James, Howard allowed himself a small, grim smile. Eric and Stacy thought they'd won with their dramatic reveal, but they'd forgotten the most important lesson Howard had learned in business. The person who throws the first punch rarely wins the fight. The real battle was just beginning. The key card clicked as Howard entered his temporary residence at the Madison Apartments. The 1-bedroom unit was a far cry from his 5-bedroom colonial, but it served its purpose. He'd chosen it specifically for its proximity to both his office and the children's schools. Setting his briefcase on the modest dining table, Howard loosened his tie and pulled out his phone. 3 weeks had passed since Eric and Stacy's dramatic revelation, and he'd spent every moment since then methodically preparing his counterattack. Marcus? It's Howard Graves. Remember that favor you owe me from the Peterson audit? He paused, listening to the forensic accountant's response. I need your expertise. Off the books. Marcus Finley's gravelly voice came through the speaker. The Peterson case saved my career, Howard. Name the time and place. Tomorrow, 7 a.m. The Capitol Grill. Private booth. Howard's tone left no room for negotiation. Bring your best equipment. We're going hunting. The next morning, Marcus arrived carrying a sleek laptop bag and the world-weary expression of someone who'd seen too many financial crimes to be shocked anymore. At 60, with steel-gray hair and reading glasses perpetually perched on his nose, he looked more like a kindly grandfather than one of the most feared forensic accountants in the business. So, Marcus said after their coffee arrived, tell me what we're looking for. Howard slid a USB drive across the table. Everything. Bank records, property transfers, communication patterns. My wife and brother have been playing a long game. I need to know how long and how deep it goes. Marcus plugged in the drive, his fingers flying across the keyboard. Your wife, Stacy. She had access to your home office? Yes. And my phone, computer, everything. Howard's jaw tightened. I trusted her completely. That's usually how it starts, Marcus muttered, his eyes scanning data streams. Then he stopped, frowning. Howard, look at this. The screen showed a pattern of recordings, hundreds of them, all carefully labeled and dated. She's been recording your business calls, Marcus explained. High-quality audio files stored on a secure cloud server. And look at the access logs. They're being downloaded regularly from an IP address registered to Eric's brokerage firm. Howard finished, his voice cold. Over the next 2 hours, they uncovered the extent of the surveillance. Stacy hadn't just been recording calls. She'd photographed documents, copied emails, and maintained detailed notes about Howard's business strategies and client meetings. This isn't just about the affair or the kids, Marcus concluded, pushing back from his laptop. They've been using your business intelligence for insider trading. Eric's trading patterns match perfectly with your firm's major moves. Every time you made a significant investment decision, he was one step ahead, Howard nodded. Give me everything. Every trade, every recording, every document access. Marcus hesitated. Howard, this is bigger than forensic accounting. You need someone who can dig deeper into their personal lives. Someone who can... Already on it. Howard pulled out his phone and dialed another number. Alberto? It's time. Alberto Barrera had been a homicide detective before moving into private investigation. He'd helped Howard vet potential business partners over the years, and his reputation for discretion was legendary. They met that afternoon in a small coffee shop in Georgetown. Your brother's done this before, Alberto announced without preamble, sliding a thick folder across the table. 2 other families, similar pattern. Married women, wealthy husbands, kids involved. He and the wives would plan it for years, gathering evidence, setting up the perfect trap. Howard opened the folder, studying the photographs and reports. Why didn't they press charges? Pride. Shame. And Eric was careful. He made sure the husbands had something to lose if everything came to light. One guy had been skimming corporate accounts. Another had an illegal offshore betting operation. Alberto leaned forward. But you? Your records are clean. That's probably why they needed so much time to set this up. Get me everything on the other families, Howard instructed. And I mean everything. School records for the kids, medical histories, financial statements. If Eric so much as jaywalked near their homes, I want to know about it. As Alberto left, Howard's phone buzzed. A text from his sister Kelly. The kids miss you. Sarah asked about you at piano practice today. His fingers hovered over the phone. The hardest part of all this was maintaining distance from the children while he built his case. But he couldn't risk Stacy using their interactions against him in court. Instead of responding, he made another call. Renee? I need your expertise. Renee Foster had been Howard's head of cybersecurity for 5 years. She arrived at his apartment that evening, her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, carrying a laptop that could probably hack the Pentagon. I ran deep scans on both their email histories, she reported, setting up her equipment. It goes back 15 years, Howard. They started planning this before you even met Stacy. Show me. The emails were damning. Eric and Stacy had met at a finance conference in Chicago. They'd started their affair immediately, but it wasn't just about sex. They'd strategized, planned, documented everything. Look at this email from 15 years ago. Renee pointed to the screen. Target acquired. He's perfect, rich, trusting, and too focused on work to notice anything suspicious. That's from Stacy to Eric. 3 days after she met you. Howard's expression remained neutral, but his hands clenched under the table. The twins' conception wasn't an accident either. Renee continued, pulling up more emails. They planned it specifically to ensure maximum emotional impact. They knew having Eric's children would give them leverage over both your emotions and your finances. The children's sports activities, Howard mused. They used those as cover for their meetings? Renee nodded, typing rapidly. Encrypted messages hidden in routine emails about baseball practice and piano lessons. They were careful, but they got sloppy toward the end. Started using their phones for direct communication. I've recovered some deleted texts. She pulled up a series of messages that made Howard's blood boil. Eric. He actually thinks they're his kids. What a fool. Stacy. Playing happy family with him makes me sick. But it'll be worth it when we take everything. Eric. Just a few more months. Then we destroy him completely. There's more, Renee said quietly. They've been using the children's trust funds as collateral for loans. High-risk investments in Eric's name. If those investments had failed, the kids would have lost everything, Howard finished. Forward all of this to Franklin Novak. My lawyer needs to see it immediately. The next morning, Howard met with Franklin in his office. The attorney had aged well over 30 years of practice, his silver hair and Brooks Brothers suits projecting an image of trustworthy authority. This is unprecedented, Franklin said, reviewing the evidence. The insider trading alone is enough for federal charges. But when you add the fraud, the embezzlement through falsified invoices that Renee uncovered, Howard, they're looking at serious prison time. Good, Howard replied. But I want this done right. No mistakes, no loopholes, no chance for them to slip away. Franklin nodded, making notes. We'll need to coordinate with the SEC for the insider trading charges. The FBI will want to look at the fraud aspects. And the district attorney's office will be very interested in the pattern of behavior with those other families. How long to build an airtight case? A month, maybe 2. We need to be thorough. They'll fight back hard when they realize what's coming. Franklin looked up from his notes. What about the children? Howard's face softened slightly. They stay protected. Whatever happens, their trust funds remain untouched. I want them taken care of, regardless of DNA. And Stacy's claims about paternity fraud? Let her make them, Howard said coldly. Every time she claims I'm not their father, she'll be admitting to insurance fraud. She listed me as the father on every policy, every school document, every medical form. Let her try to explain that to a federal judge. As Howard left Franklin's office, his phone buzzed again. A text from Stacy. The kids keep asking about you. Getting harder to explain why Daddy abandoned them. Ready to negotiate yet? Howard didn't respond, but he smiled. Let them think they were winning. Let them believe their plan was working perfectly. The time would come soon enough when they'd realize just how badly they'd underestimated him. That evening, he met with his entire team: Marcus, Alberto, Renee, and Franklin in a private room at the Capitol Grill. The evidence was spread across the table like pieces of a complex puzzle. One last thing, Alberto said, pulling out a final report. I found something interesting about Eric's brokerage license. There are some irregularities in his initial application. If we pull that thread— Do it, Howard ordered. Pull every thread. Check every document. I want no surprises when we move. Marcus raised his glass. To justice? Howard shook his head. To patience. And to making sure they never hurt another family again. As his team discussed strategy, Howard's mind drifted to the children. Jason's baseball games, James's science projects, Sarah's piano recitals. DNA didn't matter. They were his kids, and he would make sure they had a future free from their mother's manipulations and their biological father's schemes. The next morning, Howard received a call from his building's security. Eric had tried to gain access to his office, claiming he needed to discuss family matters. Your brother left a message, his secretary reported. He says you're only hurting yourself by dragging this out. He and Stacy are willing to be generous if you cooperate. Howard's response was simple. Tell him my lawyers will be in touch. Let them think he was beaten. Let them believe their plan was flawless. Howard Graves had learned long ago that the best revenge wasn't served cold, it was served with precision, patience, and absolute certainty. As he reviewed the mounting evidence with his team, Howard remembered something his father had told him years ago. In business and in life, son, never throw the first punch. But when you hit back, make sure they stay down. Eric and Stacy had thrown their punch. Now Howard was methodically assembling the evidence that would not just knock them down, but destroy everything they'd built through lies and manipulation. The investigation continued, each day bringing new revelations of their deception. Howard maintained his distance from the children, though it pained him. Better a few months of confusion than a lifetime of watching their mother and biological father manipulate them for financial gain. As Alberto dug deeper into Eric's past, more victims emerged. Women who'd been used as pawns in previous schemes, business partners who'd been betrayed, families that had been torn apart. None had fought back effectively, but their stories added weight to the growing case. Your brother's gotten bolder over the years, Alberto reported during their weekly update. The patterns are consistent, but the scale keeps increasing. You're his biggest target yet. And his last, Howard replied firmly. Renee's cyber investigation revealed more layers of deception. Stacy had been systematically copying and forwarding business documents for years, using a sophisticated system of hidden email accounts and encrypted messages. She didn't just record your calls, Renee explained, showing him the data trails. She installed keyloggers on your devices, copied entire hard drives, even photographed documents in your briefcase while you slept. Marcus's financial analysis painted a picture of long-term planning and calculated deception. They've been moving money through a series of shell companies, he reported, preparing for this moment for years. But they made mistakes, got careless with the documentation. Franklin worked tirelessly to organize the evidence into a cohesive legal strategy. We're not just building a defense against their claims, he explained. We're constructing a comprehensive criminal case. When we move, they won't know what hit them. Howard maintained his outward appearance of a man under siege. He let Eric and Stacy see him looking tired at school events, appeared distracted at business meetings, gave them just enough signs of breaking to feed their confidence. Inside his temporary apartment, however, he worked with cold precision, organizing the evidence that would ensure their destruction. The walls were covered with timelines, financial records, and surveillance photos. Every piece of information was another nail in their coffin. As the investigation phase neared its end, Howard received one final piece of evidence from Alberto, a recording of Eric and Stacy discussing their plans at what they thought was a secure location. Howard's always been weak. Eric's voice dripped with contempt. All that talk about family and trust. Pathetic. He made it so easy, Stacy laughed. Playing devoted husband and father while we built the trap. I almost feel sorry for him. No, you don't, Eric replied. You're right, Stacy agreed. I don't. When this is over, we'll have everything: the money, the house, the kids as leverage. And Howard? He'll have nothing. Just like he deserves. Howard listened to the recording twice, his expression unchanging. Then he made one final call to Franklin. Are we ready? Everything's in place, Franklin confirmed. The SEC is prepared to move on the insider trading. The FBI has enough evidence for multiple fraud charges. And the district attorney is very interested in the pattern of behavior with the other families. Good, Howard said quietly. Then it's time to let them think they've won. The pieces were in place. The evidence was secured. Now it was time for the final phase of Howard's response to their betrayal. Eric and Stacy thought they'd orchestrated the perfect plan to destroy him. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. Howard sat in his small apartment, surrounded by stacks of financial documents. His signature, freshly dried, marked the bottom of each page. To anyone watching, it appeared he was surrendering everything he'd built. Are you certain about this strategy? Franklin Novak asked, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. Once we start this play, there's no going back. They expect me to fight the eviction, Howard replied, his voice steady. They're prepared for a legal battle over the house and assets. What they're not prepared for is total capitulation. Franklin gathered the signed documents into his briefcase. The meeting to finalize the asset transfer is scheduled for tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eric and Stacy's lawyers confirmed their attendance. And our other guests? The SEC agents will be in position. FBI too. The district attorney's office is coordinating with both agencies. Franklin paused. You know they'll try to hurt you through the children one last time. Howard's expression hardened. The kids are staying with Kelly this week. Stacy agreed, thinking it would give her time to clear out my things from the house. A cold smile crossed his face. She always underestimated my relationship with my sister. The next morning, Howard dressed with particular care: charcoal suit, white shirt, blue tie. The same outfit he'd worn the day Eric and Stacy had arrived with their revelation. He wanted them to remember this. The conference room at Franklin's law firm filled slowly. Eric and Stacy arrived first, both wearing expressions of barely concealed triumph. Stacy had dressed expensively, no doubt using the credit cards she thought Howard couldn't track. Eric wore his usual banker's armor bespoke suit, gold watch, shark smile. Brother, Eric nodded mockingly. Ready to sign everything away? Howard didn't respond, taking his seat silently. Their lawyers spread documents across the mahogany table, pointing out signature lines with efficient precision. Before we begin, Franklin announced, there are some additional parties who need to be present for this transaction. The conference room door opened. 3 men and a woman entered, their expressions professionally neutral. What is this? Stacy demanded. Allow me to introduce Special Agent Carter from the SEC, Franklin said calmly, along with Special Agent Rodriguez from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division and Assistant District Attorney Chun. Eric's smile faltered. This is a private family matter. These people have no business. Oh, but they do, Howard spoke for the first time. You see, this isn't just about a house or some bank accounts. This is about 15 years of fraud, insider trading, and criminal conspiracy. The color drained from Stacy's face. You're bluffing. You have nothing. Howard nodded to Franklin, who opened his laptop. The large screen on the conference room wall flickered to life, displaying emails, financial records, and surveillance photos. Nothing? Howard's voice was ice. Let's start with the insider trading. Every major trade you made, Eric, perfectly timed with information Stacy stole from my office. Hundreds of recorded calls, thousands of photographed documents. You can't prove, Eric began. Then there's the insurance fraud, Howard continued as if Eric hadn't spoken. Every medical form, every school document, every insurance policy where Stacy listed me as the father while knowing I wasn't. That's federal fraud, by the way. For each document, Stacy's lawyer leaned over to whisper urgently in her ear. She shoved him away. The embezzlement through falsified invoices was clever, Howard acknowledged. Having shell companies bill my firm for non-existent services, then routing the money through offshore accounts. But you got sloppy with the paperwork. Eric stood abruptly. This meeting is over. We're leaving. Sit down, Mr. Graves, Special Agent Rodriguez said quietly. The only place you're going is our field office. You planned this, Stacy hissed at Howard. All of it. The quiet surrender. Signing over the assets, it was a trap, like the trap you and Eric planned for 15 years? Howard's voice remained calm. The one where you married me for my money, had my brother's children, and documented everything so you could destroy me? The evidence continued to scroll across the screen. Bank statements showing money laundering, encrypted messages planning the deception, DNA tests proving the calculated nature of the children's conception. But the most damning evidence, Howard concluded, comes from your other victims. Eric's head snapped up. What other victims? The screen showed photographs of other families, other homes, other lives destroyed. You've done this before, brother. But your previous targets were too ashamed to fight back, too worried about their reputations. I'm not. Special Agent Carter stepped forward. Mr. Graves, Eric Graves, you're under arrest for multiple counts of securities fraud, insider trading, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Mrs. Graves, you're under arrest for wire fraud, insurance fraud, and embezzlement. You can't do this, Stacy screamed as handcuffs clicked around her wrists. Those are my children. You can't take my children. They were never just bargaining chips, Howard said quietly. They're children who deserve better than parents who saw them as weapons in a financial scheme. As Eric and Stacy were led away, Howard remained seated, watching them go. Franklin dismissed their shocked lawyers, who practically ran from the room. The press will have this within the hour, Franklin warned. Good. Howard stood, straightening his tie. Let everyone see what they really are. The next few weeks passed in a blur of headlines and legal proceedings. Brothers' betrayal leads to major financial crimes bust splashed across every financial paper. Eric's previous victims came forward, emboldened by Howard's stand. The evidence was overwhelming. The hardest part was explaining everything to the children. Howard arranged for family counseling with a child psychologist who specialized in parental betrayal cases. The initial sessions were brutal. So you're not really our dad? Jason had asked, his 13-year-old face struggling to remain stoic. Biology doesn't make a father, Howard replied firmly. Love does. And I have loved you, all of you, since the day you were born. That will never change. The twins processed the news differently. James threw himself into his science projects, while Jason quit baseball, unable to face the memories of how his mother and biological father had used the sport to cover their meetings. Sarah, at 10, simply asked if she could still call Howard Daddy. His heart broke and mended in the same moment. Kelly proved invaluable during this time. The children stayed with her while Howard dealt with the legal aftermath, providing them stability and a safe space to process their emotions. They're strong kids, Kelly assured him over coffee one morning. They get that from you, not their biology. The federal trials moved quickly, the evidence too overwhelming for any real defense. Eric's lawyer attempted to paint him as a victim of Stacy's manipulation, while her lawyer tried the opposite approach. Neither strategy worked. Howard attended each day of the trials, sitting silently in the back of the courtroom. He wanted them to see him, to know he was watching their downfall. Both Eric and Stacy attempted to contact him through their lawyers, offering deals and threatening to reveal embarrassing personal details. Let them, Howard told Franklin. I have nothing to hide. They're the ones who built their lives on lies. The convictions, when they came, were comprehensive. Eric lost everything: his freedom, his brokerage license, his reputation. The judge was particularly harsh, noting the pattern of destruction across multiple families. Stacy, facing 15 years in federal prison, finally showed emotion during her sentencing. Please, she begged the judge. My children need their mother. You should have thought about that, the judge replied coldly, before you used them as pawns in your scheme. 5 years passed. Howard rebuilt his life, focusing on his children and his business. The house that Eric and Stacy had tried to steal became a home again, filled with new memories that slowly buried the painful ones. The children, supported by therapy and Howard's unwavering love, began to heal. They chose to keep the Graves surname, a decision that meant more to Howard than any financial victory. Blood doesn't make a family, James announced one evening over dinner, now 18 and preparing for college. Actions do. Jason, having found a new passion in photography, nodded in agreement. Besides, who wants to be associated with those two? Sarah, now 15 and still playing piano, had perhaps the simplest take. You're our dad. Period. Both Eric and Stacy attempted to contact the children from prison. Their letters went unopened, their calls unanswered. The children had made their choice, choosing the father who loved them over the parents who had seen them as tools for revenge. Howard's revenge hadn't just been about punishment, it had been about justice, about protecting not only his family but preventing Eric and Stacy from destroying other lives. In the end, blood had proved thinner than water, but integrity had proved stronger than both. The final piece of mail Howard received about the case was a notice that Eric and Stacy had been denied their appeals. He filed it away without comment, then went to watch Sarah's piano recital, where she played Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata flawlessly. Looking at his daughter on stage, Howard knew he'd won more than just a legal victory. He protected the only thing that truly mattered: his family's future. Eric and Stacy had tried to use love as a weapon, but they'd never understood that real love, like real strength, couldn't be faked or manipulated. It was this understanding that made Howard not just a victor, but a father. And in the end, that was the only title that mattered. Epilogue. 10 years after the verdict. The visiting room at the Federal Correctional Institution in Danbury, Connecticut, remained as austere as it had been for the past decade. Stacy Graves, now showing strands of gray in her once perfect blonde hair, sat alone at a metal table. The guard had informed her 30 minutes ago that her children wouldn't be coming again. She'd been sending monthly visitation requests for 10 years, and for 10 years, they'd been declined. Her prison uniform hung loose on her frame, a far cry from the designer clothes she'd worn during the trial. The other inmates called her the schemer not for her crimes, but for her endless plots to regain contact with her children, all of which failed. 3 cells down, a letter lay crumpled in her trash bin. Dear Ms. Graves, we represent James, Jason, and Sarah Graves. This is our final notice requesting that you cease attempting to contact our clients through any means, including but not limited to letters, phone calls, or visitation requests. Any further attempts will result in legal action. Respectfully, Morton and Associate. At the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn, Eric Graves faced his own daily humiliations. His prison job in the laundry facility was a far cry from his corner office at the brokerage firm. His cellmate, ironically, was another financial fraudster who'd once sought Eric's investment advice. Eric had tried writing a memoir titled Brother versus Brother, the truth behind the headlines, but every publisher rejected it. The rejection letters all carried the same message. Howard's story was already public record, documented in court transcripts and investigative journalism pieces. Nobody wanted Eric's self-serving version of events. Meanwhile, in Greenwich, Connecticut, Howard Graves' life had taken a markedly different path. The old colonial house, once a battlefield in Eric and Stacy's scheme, had become a true family home. Howard had considered selling it after the trial but decided against it. Instead, he'd renovated it completely, erasing the physical remnants of betrayal while preserving the good memories his children had grown up with. On this particular Sunday evening, the house was alive with celebration. Sarah, now 20, was home from Juilliard for the weekend, preparing for her first major piano recital at Carnegie Hall. The twins, at 23, had both graduated college, James with a degree in biomedical engineering from MIT, and Jason with a degree in investigative journalism from Columbia. Dad, Sarah called from the kitchen, where she was helping prepare dinner. Jason's latest article just went viral. Howard looked up from his tablet, pride evident in his expression. After the scandal, Jason had channeled his anger into investigating financial crimes. His recent Expose series, Patterns of Betrayal, Financial Predators in American Families had earned him consideration for a Pulitzer. 3 million views and counting, Jason reported, his old baseball trophies long since replaced by journalism awards. The best part? Someone recognized Uncle Eric's methodology in another case. The FBI's reopening investigations from 20 years ago. James, setting the table, shared his own news. The patent for my medical device authentication system just got approved. No one will be able to forge medical records the way Mom did. Not with this in place. Howard watched his children in every way that mattered and marveled at how they transformed their pain into purpose. The DNA results that Eric and Stacy had wielded as a weapon had become meaningless in the face of real family bonds. Kelly arrived for dinner with her husband Tom, carrying her famous apple pie. Her role during the crisis years had earned her a permanent place in their Sunday family dinners. She'd recently retired from her position as a victim advocate, her experience with her own family having led her to help others navigate similar betrayals. "Did you see the latest appeal was denied?" Kelly asked Howard quietly while the kids were distracted. Howard nodded. Eric had tried claiming ineffective counsel, but the courts had rejected it outright. His former lawyer had provided documentation of Eric rejecting plea deals that would have reduced his sentence. "Franklin called," Howard replied. "Stacy's trying to get early release again. Medical issues, apparently. Real ones this time? Does it matter?" The conversation was interrupted by the doorbell. Alberto Barrera, the private investigator who'd helped expose Eric's previous victims, had arrived with his wife Maria. After the case, he'd become a close family friend, often consulting with Jason on investigative pieces. "Marcus sends his regards," Alberto announced, hanging up his coat. "He's in Singapore, teaching forensic accounting. Uses your case as a primary example." Renee Foster arrived next, now running her own cybersecurity firm. She'd partnered with James on his medical authentication system, ensuring it was hack-proof. The success of the Graves case had established her reputation in the field. As they gathered around the dining table, Howard looked at the extended family he'd built from the ashes of betrayal. The conversation flowed naturally, touching on everything from Sarah's upcoming recital to Jason's investigations to James's innovations. The topic eventually turned to recent news about Eric and Stacy, as it sometimes did during these gatherings. "Mom's latest letter arrived yesterday," Sarah mentioned, her tone matter-of-fact. "I returned it unopened, like always." "She tried adding me on LinkedIn," James added with a dry laugh. "From a prison computer program account. Claimed she wanted to support my career development." "Uncle Eric's more creative," Jason contributed. "He attempted to contact me through a prison ministry program, claiming he'd found God and wanted to make amends. My editor got a good laugh out of that one." Howard listened to his children discuss their biological parents with a detachment that had taken years of therapy to achieve. The betrayal had left scars, but they'd healed stronger. Later that evening, after the guests had left and the kids had retired to their old rooms, Howard sat in his study. The wall that had once held family photos now displayed his children's achievements, Sarah's concert programs, Jason's published articles, James's patents. Mixed among them were the legal documents that had ended Eric and Stacy's scheme, preserved as reminders of justice served. His phone buzzed with a text from Franklin Novak, who'd recently become a federal judge. "Thought you should know. Eric's trying to publish a book again. Publishers still aren't interested. Some stories only work when truth wins." Howard smiled, remembering the day 10 years ago when truth had indeed won. The evidence had been irrefutable, the justice swift. Eric had lost everything: his freedom, his licenses, his reputation. His attempt to paint himself as a victim of Stacy's manipulation had backfired spectacularly when evidence emerged of his previous schemes. Stacy's fall had been equally complete. The woman who had once prided herself on manipulating men now spent her days in prison counseling sessions, mandatory programs designed to address her sociopathic tendencies. Her therapist reports, which Franklin occasionally shared, suggested she still blamed everyone but herself for her situation. The financial penalties had been severe. Every asset Eric and Stacy had accumulated through their schemes had been confiscated. The restitution orders would ensure that even after their release, they would never regain their former lifestyle. Their attempts at early release had been consistently denied. their appeals rejected. The pattern of deception revealed during the trial had convinced every judge that they remained a threat to society. Howard's own life had flourished in ways Eric and Stacy couldn't have predicted. His investment firm had grown stronger, his reputation for integrity attracting clients who valued honest financial management. He'd established a foundation that helped victims of financial fraud, providing resources and legal support to families targeted by schemes similar to Eric's. The children had exceeded everyone's expectations. They'd taken the pain of betrayal and transformed it into driving forces for positive change. Jason's journalism exposed financial predators, James's innovations protected medical records, and Sarah's music touched hearts while helping fund art therapy programs for traumatized children. Their decisions to keep the Graves surname had been made independently, each child choosing Howard's legacy over their biological parents' shame. They'd even legally changed their middle names, removing any connection to Eric and Stacy's families. The extended family that had formed during the crisis remained close. Kelly's role as aunt had expanded to include mentor and confidant. Alberto's investigative skills had guided Jason's career choice. Renee's technical expertise had influenced James's path in medical security. Even Marcus, though often abroad, maintained regular contact through video calls, sharing his expertise with the next generation of forensic accountants. Franklin's rise to the federal bench had been partially influenced by his handling of the case. His thorough prosecution had set new precedents for dealing with long-term financial fraud schemes. The story had become a cautionary tale in legal and financial circles. Harvard Business School had created a case study based on it, examining how trusted insiders could exploit family businesses. Jason had guest lectured there, providing first-hand insight into the human cost of such betrayals. Eric and Stacy's other victims had found closure through the trial. Several had formed a support group, which Howard's foundation now funded. Their stories had helped change laws regarding financial fraud within families, establishing stronger protections for victims. Howard's phone buzzed again, a group text from his children. Sarah, Carnegie Hall rehearsal tomorrow. Dad, front row seat still has your name on it. Jason, breaking news can wait. Wouldn't miss it. James, bringing the prototype for the new security system. Install teams ready for next week. Howard smiled, remembering Eric's words from 10 years ago. Blood is thicker than water. His brother had been wrong about that, just as he'd been wrong about everything else. It wasn't blood that made a family, it was love, trust, and integrity. The moon cast shadows through the study window, reminding Howard of countless nights spent building the case that had brought justice. But justice hadn't just been about punishment. It had been about protection, protecting his children, protecting other potential victims, protecting the very idea of what family should mean. Eric and Stacy had tried to destroy his family with lies, manipulation, and betrayal. Instead, they'd inadvertently strengthened it, forging bonds that no DNA test could ever break. Their scheme had failed not just legally, but fundamentally they'd never understood that real family transcended biology. As Howard prepared for bed, he paused to straighten a family photo on the wall, a recent one, showing him with his children at James's graduation. Their smiles were genuine, their bond unshakable. In the end, that was his true victory. Not the legal triumph, not the financial recovery, but the family that had emerged stronger from the crucible of betrayal. Tomorrow, he would sit in Carnegie Hall, watching his daughter play Beethoven. His sons would be there, their own achievements adding harmony to their sister's music. And somewhere in prison cells in Connecticut and Brooklyn, Eric and Stacy would continue serving their sentences, learning the hardest lesson of all. Betrayal's price is paid not just in years, but in the love and trust forever lost. The house settled into its nighttime quiet, a home where truth had defeated deception, where integrity had overcome betrayal, where love had proven stronger than blood. Howard Graves slept soundly, knowing that his family chosen by love, rather than defined by genetics, was flourishing in ways Eric and Stacy could never comprehend. In the end, they had tried to break him with a DNA test, never understanding that fatherhood was measured not in chromosomes, but in love, protection, and unwavering support. That was a lesson Howard had known all along, one his children had learned through his actions rather than his words, and one that would continue to guide their family long after Eric and Stacy's names had faded from memory.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.